Greetings. The following presentation, we will observe a rhetorical overview and analysis of the essay Time and Distance Overcome by Eula Biss. Now, the writer Eula Biss is noted as an American nonfiction writer who has written many books, and she's also garnered many awards. I think also interesting to her credit is that she's been compared to, at least that I've observed, she's been compared to the iconic writer Joan Didion. And if you're being compared to Joan Didion, I think that puts you on a pretty high category. The essay also will be framed under an exemplification framing. So I think most essays have the compatibility of in which the genre can fit several framings. But for this particular framing, we will do it under we'll do it under the exemplification umbrella, so to speak. Now, so at the core of an exemplification essay is, of course, the claim. And then that claim is then supported by a series of notable examples as one goes throughout the essay. So this particular essay, I'd like to read the following thesis that carries the following formula. So, this is a formula that may or may not go in this particular structure. Depends on you as a writer, how creative you want to be. But I think there's the linearity of it has the capacity to make your writing much more efficient. Well, anyhow, here's the thesis. The invention of the telephone, despite its capacity to revolutionize communication and unify people closer together, perpetuates and reveals the social and racial divisions of its time. So let's break it down. So the subject, of course, is this invention, this revolutionizing invention of the telephone. And the point is that it perpetuates, this is the argument, it perpetuates and reveals the social and racial divisions of the time. So now let's ask, is this argumentative? Well, the fact that one is saying is that it perpetuates it. I mean, when we think of the telephone, one would try to say that, if anything, it's promoting progress. But here, the argument is that it's perpetuating these social and racial divisions. I think it safely puts it in that argumentative category. And remember, a thesis statement, you want to ensure that it is indeed argumentative. You don't just want to be factual, because most factual statements tend to lead towards, a passive reading of sorts, rather than a more engaged and motivated reading. Now, the thesis there doesn't include a why component, but I think when we're mentioning social and racial divisions, when we're bringing in this case, a new invention, why do people react that way? And I think a good reasoning is that there's a failure to embrace change, and I think this is one of the noted inferencing whys that Biss lays out in her essay. So there's the thesis, right? There's the thesis. Here's the telephone, mention the telephone, and this invention here. What does it do? It perpetuates and reveals social and racial divisions. Okay. Now, in writing, Biss doesn't want to show that, Bell's invention is right off the bat a negative marking. No, she certainly wants to acknowledge Bell's invention as a constructive act of progress. And so observe the following quote. This was the mind of a man who wanted to invent, more than the telephone, a machine that would allow the deaf to hear. I think it's a pretty notable statement, because it kind of lays out Bell not as someone who's simply coming. Of course, uh, um, if you're inventing something very progressive, you want to be acknowledged for it. But um, his invention seems to have a humanistic and maybe um, an ethical emblem on it, right? It's meant to help the deaf hear, so to speak. So that's pretty notable, right? This is not something that Bell's doing it for any, division purposes, but rather, if anything, for unity and the revolutionizing of communication. Okay. Well, as noted, as noted in the thesis, the perpetuation of social and racial divisions, right? And, um, Biss begins by pointing out the telephone in this case is triggering, and so here's another quote. Then the telephone became a plaything of the rich. Well, what does she mean by that? Well, here she says, here's this invention, here's this business banker, and he's wants to create this private line between his work and the home, in which he can easily communicate and have the home have a dinner ready or something of the sort, right? Inform them when he's going home. So, with regards to this issue of you know um, um, this class division of sorts, you can argue, right? There's kind of a war on telephone poles, that the New York Times acknowledges, and this war, as regards to notions of, again, to reiterate, private property and an aesthetic marking. So for private property, imagine you're a homeowner, and in front of your home you're having these telephone poles, uplifted, and well, you're not happy with that, right? And you certainly wanted to, you want to get rid of them. You say, well, do it elsewhere, but not on my home. This is my property. I don't care about the revolution aspect, this revolution aspect of communication. I want you to, in essence, indeed eliminate these um, telephone poles, so to speak. So to further exemplify, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, the city council asked the police to chop down the telephone poles. In Oshkosh, Wyoming, the mayor asked the police and fire department to chop down the telephone poles as well. So the telephone company, as it's witnessing, their telephone poles being chopped down, or at minimum, the threat of their telephone poles being chopped down, it asked its workers to climb on top of the telephone poles and set themselves there, as in the illustration here, until the poles are settled and the electricity up on top is kind of aligned and wired, so to speak. In order to avoid this continuous chopping down of the poles, right? Once it's set, it's harder for them to chop down the poles, so to speak, right? So up to this point, this is one of the first um, 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 triggers, of the invention of the telephone, that um, it's this context of private property, this war for this war on not only property but the optics of aesthetics is compromised. Okay. So in order to switch to a new subject, what Biss is going to do is Biss wants to continue providing that essence of let's not forget what Belle's intention is, and so she illustrates this. She illustrates this with President Rutherford B. Hayes and his commentary that one of the greatest events since creation is, when they're hooking up the telephone, when they're establishing the telephone in the White House. He's recognizing it. Right? Here's this invention of progress. Whereas previously there's all sorts of madness for in this notion of invasion of private property and the aesthetics, right? The compromising aesthetics that these polls are bringing about. But here's the president. Hey, let's not forget this. Here's the president kind of telling you that this is something fantastic, right? This is an invention that's such a great stature since creation. Of course, there's a little bit of an exaggeration there, but at minimum, it's a pretty notable accomplishment. And so, despite that accomplishment, right, the president acknowledging the telephone, um, this provides a little bit of irony, right? The irony of unity. So here's this revolutionary idea of the telephone, and how, in essence, it's narrowing distance, and it's in essence saving time. There's a little bit of irony to it. Well, how so? And this is things get a little bit dark here. In Lake Cormorant, Mississippi, a minority is hanged. In Wire City, Kansas, minority is hanged. In Brookhaven, Mississippi, a minority is hanged. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, a minority is hanged and riddled with bullets. In Danville, Illinois, a minority is hung and his throat is slit. And so on, Lewisburg, West Virginia. And the notable aspects here is that, the telephone has that unifying possibility, yet instead of the unification here is prompted not so much by the telephone, but by these severe acts of violence, right? And this is the ironic tone of it, right? Here's this fascinating invention, but you people, rather than validate it, right, as a great resource, no, instead you go out there and you're committing, these inhumane, destructive acts, so to speak. In Hempstead, Texas, not one is hung, but two simultaneously. In Belleville, Illinois, one is dragged out of a courtroom and one is dragged out of jail, and they're both hung, right? So here's the section on, the irony of unity and disunity, right? Or rather, a unity for the unity in this kind of promoting of segregation of sorts. Okay. So now Biss is going to switch over, not much, but she's going to switch over under a different label. And so that label is going to be the label of lynching, right? And she quotes, "Lynching is an American invention." So she's now, this new section, she's going to go out, and the lynching, of course, is triggered by the presupposed attack of minorities onto the majority, right? And again, right, she wants to give off this kind of side, slight little distractor so that um, um, readers are not uh, um, thinking, in essence, that um, Bell's invention of the telephone has these intentions. Anyhow, so she gives a little bit of an inference with the following quote where she says, "The children's game of telephone depends on the fact that a message passed quietly from one ear to another will get distorted at some point along the line." Right? So, there's this not only with the telephone, but in terms of racial and social divisions. Um, it should be noted that um, there's a distortion, right? There's a distortion of the perception of society. So part of the perception is as follows. Biss points out, in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a minority attacks a white. In Longview, Texas, a minority attacks a white. In Greenville, Mississippi, a minority attacks a white. In Purcell, Oklahoma, minority attacks a white. And so in each one of these cities, um, what's happening with the minorities that they captured committing these deeds, right? Or is it a kind of myth, right? Maybe these so-called attacks really weren't attacks. So I'm not quite particularly sure the extent of the truth of those claims, but I think that's what Biss is suggesting here a little bit, right? That some manipulation of the truth so that um, you know uh, the majority culture gets what it wants. Okay, and it was only coincidence that the telephone poles so closely resembled crucifixes, almost as the proposed intention in this case. So continuing, in Shreveport, Louisiana, hung for attacking a white girl. In Cummings, Georgia, hung for attacking a white girl. Right. In Waco, Texas, same thing, for attacking. In Pittsburgh, Kansas, they were burned, shot, hung from a telephone pole. In Cumberland, Maryland, one of the telephone poles is used as a battering ram to try to get to a minority, right? And of course, lynch him, so to speak. So again, as noted in the previous examples, um, you have that separation of unity, and the irony that the telephone is aimed to create a type of unity. Here, the examples on lynching um, provide, in a sense, an illustration on. Um, um, of course, the unity here is different, right? But it's also the same. It's different in the sense that um, these are not just random hangings. There's an attempt to validate the reasoning for such hangings, in that these um, minorities are attacking, the people, right? And she's going to give again another section, and the section is a section on riots, right? So again, where these acts of violence are going to occur and involving the telephone pole. So in Spring Hill, Ohio, there's a series of race riots. In East St. Illinois, there's race riots. And so again, this is illustrating the detrimental aspects that are occurring because of these telephone poles. Nevertheless, she also wants to point out how Bell, prior to his death, was able to make a phone call for the first time from New York City all the way to San Francisco, thus acknowledging the establishment of over 130,000 telephone poles. Yeah, and who yeah, so in that process, right? It, she wants to illustrate the sense, right? The manifestation to where look how many poles are now being situated across the U.S. And so, um, again, she wants to bring about a little slight breath of fresh air, um, and in doing so, it becomes more emphatic all those terrible atrocities that are occurring. So we're going to get to her conclusion, and in her conclusion, she states, "When I was young, I believed that the telephone poles with their transformers catching the evening sun were glorious." I mean, this was the intention, right? When you see the invention of the telephone pole, that it's supposed to promote this revolutionary innovation. Um, so she's not wrong, right? You know, there's the belief when we think about the communicative aspects of the telephone, but also I think we're losing that touch of, um, in that the unity of this new invention, you're losing that touch with humanity, right? With being a little sense of humanitarianism. So Biss continues. Now I tell my sister these poles, these wires, do not look the same to me. Nothing is innocent, my sister reminds me, but nothing, I would like to think, remains unrepentant. So, I mean, that's the detrimental marker and the unfortunate marker that these telephone poles, um, their perception should indeed be of a revolutionary invention. But, and this is the unfortunate marker, but unfortunately, here are these poles, right? Here are these telephone poles, and they're also a symbol for, uh, you know, um, segregation, for cruelty, for murder, for lynching, right? Um, Yet, um, it's how do is there a sense of saving the essence of that revolutionary invention? Remember that initial quote where Bell is stating, that it was an invention to help the deaf hear, right? So, as a conclusion, Biss gives us that light of, that good tone sense of light where she says, "One summer, heavy rains fell in Nebraska, and some green telephone poles grew small leafy branches." I interpret this as, the hopefulness that despite this terrible racial and social division of the past, that these telephone poles are nevertheless symbolic for something positive to come. Right? And of course, today, life almost seems unlivable without the telephone. I'm exaggerating, of course, right? But how many people, in essence, really are without the telephone? Um, and so there it is, right? Again, the subject, the invention of the telephone, and what is to be exemplified, the examples of how this invention, uh, for whatever reason, it triggered this this alignment of multiple cities. Think of all the cities that I mentioned, and in mentioning all those cities, showing the reader how um, how individuals are nevertheless cruel rather than unified, right? Riots, lynching, hangings. Uh, so series of many countless examples, so to speak. Okay. Well, I hope this has helped you. I hope it helps you clarify and see the exempli- the continuous exemplification by Biss all throughout her essay, right? Shows us city after city after city in which, yeah, telephones are being put up, but at the same time, the focus has become um, the telephone pole is almost like a symbol of a symbol of cruelty. Okay. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I hope you've acquired a better understanding of Eula Biss's essay, and I thank you for listening. Thank you.